Prepared. Okay. Faye. Shameless. Okay. It must have been quite a fall for her wing to break like that. Her right shoulder blade poked through a maze of mangled tendons, and small, delicate tendrils stuck out here and there like tiny fractured bones. The lime green wing curled back on itself and swayed, collapsed, and oozing droplets of blood onto her pink gauzy dress. Trickles of blood seeped from her scraped knee down into her matching pink sandals. At least the fall hadn't been a fatal Icarus-like plunge into the San Francisco Bay. I had just settled into a chair in Justin Herman Plaza, a hot cup of coffee and the classifieds in my hand, when she raced by me, propelling herself on someone's borrowed scooter. Her freckled face twisted with urgent short breaths, her one good wing frantic as a hummingbird's. I thought her little chest might burst from the unexpected exertion, but then she winked at me, and I fell hopelessly in love. I followed her into a small park on the Embarcadero waterfront, where she no doubt hoped to blend in with the cherry blossoms and hundreds of wild green parrots living in the eucalyptus trees. Clever girl. For a moment I was distracted by the cacophony of bleeding conures and the gurgling of the chic water fountain, but then I caught sight of the flitter and flash of her colored wings behind a fuchsia bush. She was so purposeful in her movements, I thought she must be delivering kind deeds to someone, a homeless person perhaps, so I snuck up behind her wanting only to spy. My intentions were innocent enough. My own life had been depreciated, and with all the bad that was happening in the world, I was desperate to learn how to generate a little goodwill of my own. That was 2 weeks ago. For the first couple of days after I brought her home, she wasn't very agreeable, and I can't say I blame her. My hotel room in Chinatown is, well, the perfect word for it is dank. Even I get depressed in here. I've talked to the owner about possibly moving up to the 3rd floor, where we would get a little more sun and air, but he says those rooms are reserved for the longer tenants who have a job. I don't understand his reasoning. It seems to me the unemployed need the sun and air just as much, if not more. I even tried convincing him to paint over this dismal shade of blue, hoping a fluorescent color would brighten the room and her mood. I nearly got evicted over that one. It's possible that she just didn't feel well. The damaged tendrils protruding from her back had all turned black and fallen off, and her exposed shoulder blade had developed a strange blue tinge with a milky, viscous coating, like the white of an eye straining to see again. It made me queasy to look at it, but what kind of medicine can you give someone like her? I hoped ramen noodles and Jell-O would make her feel better, but she refused everything I had to offer. Once I was able to convince her I didn't have a gun. Fairies have a paralyzing fear of iron, I learned. She relaxed a bit and began to play along with my game. That's all it was meant to be, a harmless game. She would help me get a job, and then I would let her go. I had promised her this much. She slept a lot and deeply during the day, but at night she began lying next to me, wide-eyed, whispering and singing in my ear, offering me an abundance of spark and inspiration. Though I couldn't understand the lyrics, I imagined them to be from centuries-old fairy songs. The cadence was angelic. Her voice hovered at the head of my bed as if gentle bees were swarming my ears in an aching rhythm that penetrated my soul. It didn't take long for the tears to flow. I hadn't realized how tense I had become over the months, but the layoff, the separation, the foreclosure, it was more than anyone should have to suffer. I could have easily succumbed to fairy hypnosis, but I jarred myself out of dreamlike states, just in case that was her tactic. I never wanted to be duped again. By the end of that first week, her voice began to weaken, and I could tell her rebellious pluck was waning. She was sad and anxious, as if worried I might be thinking of changing the rules of the game. It was true that I hadn't looked for a job yet. Her presence had brought so much wonder into my life I hadn't been able to leave her side. But the food had run out too, and though she couldn't fly in her condition, I cut the cords from the blinds on the 2 small windows in my room and used them to secure her to the bed. In retrospect, I might have tied her wrists a little too tightly. "Just a little longer," I said as I cinched the knots. "I mean, if you hadn't wanted to play with me, you wouldn't have winked at me in the first place, right?" A look of deep sadness settled in her eyes as I drifted toward the door. I felt guilty as hell, but couldn't say I trusted her, and I certainly didn't want my story to end up sad and horrible again. I had had enough of that in my life. The world outside still seemed a dismal and lonely place after my week in seclusion, all gray and unusually humid, suffocating almost, but I now had a molecule of hope. I heard myself whistling as I strolled to the nearest store. It was the first time I had whistled in months. When I realized I was whistling her jewel of a song, I straightened my back. I looked people in the eyes. I smiled at them. I continued to whistle in the store, imagining the food I would buy when things got better: filet mignon, crab, shrimp, champagne, while loading up on more ramen noodles, some oatmeal, a little bit of milk. My next unemployment check was still a week away, so I lifted a couple of Hershey bars too. Who could refuse chocolate?